Okay, I would like to call this planning board for Wednesday, October 10th into order. We have a quorum. We have Ted, Tara, Sarah, Barbara, and myself. We also have our trustee secretary Susan and Bill and Max. So, are there any adjustments to the agenda? I don't see any. There being none. Citizen comments. We have two members of the public today. Are there any comments outside of anything related to the pre-application? I'm assuming that you are here for the pre-application? Yeah. Great. Okay, there being none. Minutes of the last meeting of September 12th.
Do we have copies of those?
We do.
Max gave them out just now.
sorry.
I don't know whether they were distributed before, were they?
I don't know that they were, well,
I did not.
Max can confirm that, or,
Were these minutes distributed prior to the meeting?
I sent an email last Monday.
Oh, yeah, okay. Was that the one that had your other? Okay.
Yeah.
Hmm,
I sent out an email since there wasn't like some massive bundle, and I
okay,
figured we were saving paper and postage.
all right. I'm getting from this, though, that there are some of us that haven't looked at it yet.
I will count myself
So
among
why
those.
don't, let's just, in the interest of time,
Just vote on
rather
it,
than having
so
everybody
you want it.
read it.
I read it before I left the house.
Oh, okay.
So it seemed fine to me.
I'll take a nap while you read.
Yeah.
Would you prefer we
Whatever you want.
table it or
I-
vote on it? I have no, this is not changed from the draft that, Max, this hasn't changed from the draft that Susan sent,
Okay.
so, because I reviewed that and it was fine.
Obviously, I want to read, because apparently I'm quoted several times.
All right.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. We need to make better thorough than not. We don't have to do it, we haven't done it repeatedly every month. I'd like to have a motion that we table this until the next meeting.
I move to table until the next meeting.
Is there a second?
I second it.
All in
Is that
favor?
Barbara?
Yep.
Yep. All in favor, say aye. All opposed? Motion carried. We will
And apologies.
do it next time. Okay, new business. We have no site reviews, but we do have a pre-application. Sarah?
Hey. I just wanted to quickly take some time to introduce myself. My name is Sarah Rademacher, and I'm the owner of American Unagi, which is an aquaculture business that takes Maine harvested glass eels and grows them out to market size. So typically our glass eel fishery,
What's the second word?
market size?
No. American.
Unagi.
Unagi,
Yes.
Japanese word for eel.
Yes, correct.
Could you
figured it
spell that?
was. Yes.
UNAGI, and I can give you guys cards that have our website and contact information on it too. So, the last couple years I started this business. My background's in aquaculture, and I wanted a fish that had a connection to our communities and our coastlines. And I saw what was happening with our fishery, getting all shipped overseas, and then it's being imported more and more back to the US for our sushi industry. And in that kind of export and re-import, we're missing out on a lot of value that's associated with those adult eels. So I started small, and I did a pilot facility down at the Darling Marine Center the last couple of years. We actually produced over a metric ton of eels and put them out into the marketplace, saw the production numbers, and looked to show that this business would work here. And this year we expanded to a facility up in Franklin, but ultimately we're looking to build a commercial facility, and we found a really great location in Waldoboro. So I am here to say hello and let you know that we're getting much more serious in putting all the pieces together for that site and getting into what we're going to need for permitting and for working with the town. So that's my greetings and hello. And
Where
I
is the
look-
site you're thinking of?
So we're in the environmental park
Okay.
with George Sieber.
Okay.
Yep.
Do you have a relationship with Richard Chapman?
I have with Richard Chapman.
Yes, Sam.
No, Sam. Yeah, Sam. Yep.
I've known him since he was Richard.
Yeah, no, and it was interesting, before, when I first started, before I found the Darling Marine Center for a site, I actually had looked at Sam's site as a
Yes.
place to do the pilot, and got to know him, and then came to know George and the community in this area a lot better through Sam, so, yeah, he's actually, I consider him one of my advisors.
He has incredible expertise in some directions. Unbelievable.
Yeah, no, he is, he's got a great combination of engineering and kind of biological sense of things that make him really good in aquaculture, so.
Are you considering that building with the solar? Is that the facility?
No, we're gonna be building a new building.
Oh.
Yeah, so our, we're ultimately, we found it's actually below that, the Arch building, so.
So it's water and X-water, that must be a big part of the engineering.
It is,
Yeah.
yep, so it's a water-based business, but it's land-based, so what's unique with these systems is we're able to really reuse and reduce the amount of resources and actually the inputs and the outputs out of those systems, so it's a much more efficient way of growing fish than anything outside of, open water and stuff, so.
So I'm just curious.
yeah.
A zillion questions, but anyway, for a baby eel, how long are you gonna keep them before you sell them? I mean, is it a 1 year, 6 months, 2 years? What is it?
So because they come from the wild, you don't have the ability to select the fastest growing. So we actually have some fish that come to market in as little as 8 months and some that can take up to 2 years. So we end up having, it's interesting with the seasonality of this fishery, you can get them once a year, but with the kind of way that they grow out, you end up getting really consistent production. So it works really well, and we're basing our, the Europeans have been doing land-based aquaculture the same way that we're doing it since the 1980s. So we're choosing a system that's been working. They don't use hormones, they don't use antibiotics, and we've actually are working with European engineers to design the whole system. So it's a group that has built these facilities all over the world. So that was a big part in choosing a fish that has been done before and been shown successful. So
And is the waste product possible fertilizer additives?
it is. We've looked at those options. We've actually we got approached by farmers up north that are doing grain, and they're having issues with nitrogen shortages. So we're kind of trying to see if we can work something out with them, and whether or not it makes sense to do that. But yeah,
Interesting.
yeah,
Cool.
So
So how soon would you think you would be back to us with your plans?
next couple months.
Okay,
Yep.
Good.
great.
So we're diving right into it right now. So getting all those pieces and things lined up for it. So.
Sarah, can you give us a brief kind of overview of the size of the operation
Yep.
and a little bit of some of the details and in the process of growing them?
Yeah, so eel aquaculture is land-based, so it's a recirculating aquaculture system. So it's a bunch of tanks, and then you run through, if anybody's had an aquarium, it's much the same sort of filtration, so, but on a much larger scale. So you bring the eels in the spring, and they go into their own small system as babies. You wean them train them how to eat commercial diet, and then they go into a production system. So our total system, we're looking to produce 120 metric tons. So it's
Per year?
per year. Yep. So on the scale of I know that there's a lot of farms that are in the news north of us. We're a very small farm. Because of the species that we're choosing, we don't have to go massive scale. So the building size is about 20,000 square feet, and that fits our entire farm in there.
Are you going to be using poured concrete?
Yes, so
Be
it's...
very careful with the time frame.
Yeah. No, there's also some like foam concretes that these engineers use to help stabilize the tanks and the plumbing. So it'll be some form.
Just, you could get frozen out, that's all.
Yeah, no, that's definitely, in considering the time frame that we need to work with, that's gonna be a set it.
Little tight, yes.
Yeah.
And will you also process and freeze and ship? I mean, is that part of the business, or?
We see an opportunity there for sure, and that actually, we like the idea of having the option to incorporate that, not only from the market's interest, but also its additional jobs. And that brings in having processing and having more distribution is direct jobs.
But
and value.
sushi places are interested in live eels? 'Cause
Yeah.
you ship live eels, okay. Huh.
Yep. So right now we've been doing live. We've had an interest in doing like a ready-to-use sushi, but also smoked eel. We've had a bunch of interest in that, and it's super high in vitamin D, which I am a big proponent for. So we actually did some testing. We got a USDA grant last year and did some testing on our product, and it beats farm salmon with vitamin D and those nutrients. So I think that's a good thing for us in the winter.
Yeah, no kidding.
So,
I just spent 5 years being involved in a pilot study with Harvard University on the efficacy of vitamin D.
Oh yeah?
You might do very well to check in with them. They're finishing it up as we speak, and they're going to have some very concrete conclusions based on about 22 or 3,000 people.
Wow.
And you might find the conclusions to be a real sales pitch for you.
Awesome. No, that's good to know. I'll keep an eye out for that. I know I have more and more friends who are getting told they have vitamin D deficiency. So
Oh, yes. Makes me
Sunblock.
irritable thinking about it.
yeah. I just tell them I'm making some eels, so you'll be good soon. But-
Eel paste.
And how big is a mature eel?
So we sell them between 150 and 250 grams. So they're about, I think that's 18. I'm bad at inches. 20 inches.
So are these the same eels we found in the brook when we were kids?
They are. So that's
Oh.
our glass eels end up growing out to that size.
They're charming.
Yeah.
they're
I think
delicious.
they are.
Well, they're one of my favorite, unagi's one of
Really?
my favorite things. Oh, yeah,
I've never had them.
yeah, it's
no,
wonderful.
It's super satisfying as far as the fish goes, which the first ones I grew, I actually did it in my basement in Thomaston. I just
Oh, you're the one.
Yeah, I am the one.
I heard about you.
So I had the DMR hadn't permitted anybody to hold eels before for grow out, so I was like, just let me have a few, see how they are, and I ended up when I got this new facility, I was like, well, I'll just get rid of these guys, and I ended up smoking them, and I had never actually eaten them, and I was like, well, I grew them in my basement, I don't know how they're gonna be, but I was blown away, and that's actually been one of those points in my in doing this business where I was like, yeah, I got to do this. It's really delicious, and I grew up in the Midwest. I didn't eat fish because it just didn't make sense when they were being flown in from wherever, and so I was really picky about what fish I did eat. So this one I like.
Do you use wasabi with your eel?
I actually don't. I
Flavor's gone. You've
Yeah.
got wasabi.
I do love wasabi though.
Well, they don't, in Japan, they don't use wasabi. With an unagi, it's cooked, it's not raw, even though it's
Okay.
technically sushi.
Yep.
And it's got a little like a gravy on it, they don't use wasabi with the eel, because I think it would,
Oh, there's no question.
the-
You
kill
can
the
eat
flavor.
anything with wasabi
Yeah.
on it. Never know what you've had.
Yeah.
yeah.
So.
Well, exciting.
So, what's your estimated number of jobs with and without the added value of the processing?
Yeah,
Do you-
so to run the production facility, it's gonna be 5 to 7 staff, plus some additional part-time jobs with kind of helping with the harvest days and distribution. So we're looking at probably total of 10, with part of those being part-time. And then it also feeds into, we would end up using the distribution channels that lobsters use, the same way that we ship our eels. It's the same sort of temperatures, so we would help kind of support that industry.
Oh, good, okay.
Yep. And then to supply the industry, or for what we need as far as fish goes, we'd end up working with anywhere from 10 to 24 fishermen to supply, because we need glass eels to supply the seed for the farm, so.
And their feed is a commercial product.
It is, yep. So actually Europe's even made eel-specific diets. So they have specific kind of nutrient needs, but we have also found local sources for that out of Portland. Yeah.
Very
So,
cool.
Anyway, I just wanted to say hello and introduce myself, and I'll give you guys some cards and stuff before I leave.
So a sushi place in Marlboro is on the horizon, huh?
Absolutely. Well, I think does this Hannaford carry it? I
Yeah,
thought
they
that
do.
did. Yeah.
But
yeah.
Suzuki's in Rockland is the place to go. That's
Yeah, no,
high
she's-
quality.
She's phenomenal.
good sushi.
So. And actually,
They have good
Sammy's
sushi.
too in Rockland. He just got an order of eels today, so he's smoking them, which
Ooh.
is really nice.
Never had that.
Great.
Great.
All right, thank you so much.
much.
Yes.
Nice to meet you.
Have you signed in?
I
'Cause
did.
I'm gonna need your name.
I did, absolutely. And let me give. I can grab cards and stuff too here.
That's very cool.
Just pass these around.
Great, thank you.
And there's a website
Thank
on
you.
there and my
Oh,
email and
Great,
contact
thank you.
information. And I would.
Very nice.
Thank you.
Oh, here's one for you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. Would you also like to?
Exciting.
All right, so, old business. We have 3 things on here.
Should we
And
go?
why don't we just start with the long-awaited Municipal Climate Adaptation Guidance Series. Bill has been patiently
We passed these out.
waiting.
What,
I've got
Brought
mine.
extra copies.
Is this the same as you passed over?
Did the same ones, yeah, in
Yeah.
case someone,
I've got that. Okay.
I think I have 2 copies here.
You're not gonna do it up on the wall?
Did it home.
Yeah, the extras are, this is Sarah.
This is something else, I think. Extra.
I'm going to give an abbreviated version of this.
Okay.
I just want to point out a couple of things. You have this document online, so that when you access it, if you go to a particular area, you'll see on the left-hand side of the page, there will be a little note that says click here for chapter. If you click that, what will open up, and it does take a little bit of time to open up, it will actually give you the recommendations that someone put together under the particular topic, whether it's transportation or culverts or whatever. So that way you can access, some of the suggestions. This is not an extensive, discussion of the possible ways of dealing with adaptation ordinances or strategies. And what I'd like to do is highlight just a couple of areas that are important to us. And the first things I want to say is that in our comprehensive plan that was recently passed, we concentrated on a couple of areas that we're going to talk about tonight. In particular, we said we needed to relook at stormwater standards, erosion control, and culverts were among the things. And Barbara, you had mentioned a couple times that the standards we use for sizing our stormwater system are typically 2, 10, and 25-year storms, and we're starting to see storms of a much more, extensive, duration and rainfall, amounts on that. In fact, today I looked at 2, in another town, 2 retention ponds that were designed 2, 10, and 25-year, and they were installed properly, they maintain them, and they are, I don't want to use the word failing, but they're not suitable for the, some of the rain events that we're having. So so there's something that needs to be done. So this is one of, I only mention that because part of this conversation about looking at adaptation strategies is to plan ahead. So not just for what's happening today, but, plan ahead for, 25, 50 or more years on that.
So
We all know that, I thought you had questions. No, all right.
I have a question.
Sure.
So I see these are all these main agencies, and then this click here button for suggestions or
Sample ordinances or
yeah,
something.
more clarification. So are these state ordinances?
Some
for
are, Barbara,
suggestions,
some
or
are-
are they just kind of descriptions? of
Some are
suggestions?
BMPs, like the ones on transportation and the culverts are more best management practices and things like that. There's a couple that refer to model ordinances like subdivision or the site review, but based on a model ordinance, things like that. And then there's drinking water standards. Some of those are just a combination of looking at some best management practices and things like that. One of the things, and just keying this in more to Waldeboro, is that we are fortunate in many respects that sea level rise that's occurring what may not have as a dramatic impact in Waldeboro as it would in some other communities for a variety of reasons. But it certainly will have an impact, more particularly on some inland areas, and not necessarily dramatic flooding like we see what's happening in a hurricane in Florida, but flooding that occurs after a rain event, whether it's a high incidence of water that overtakes the existing culvert system or road swales or retention ponds, and we get flooding, on property that wasn't previously flooded, or roadways of washout, or we have complete washouts of culverts, and we've had those situations. We've all seen them on the news. So that impact of more severe rain events has an impact not just along the coast or along ponds and rivers, but it has an impact throughout the entire watershed, as it were, particularly river streams and our own stormwater system itself on that. So some of the things that this document does is that it tries to look ahead and say plan for the future. So I want to concentrate on stormwater systems, transportation, and culverts, at least for our discussion right here. Just stop me as I go along on that. I'm not going to go through, but if you go to the transportation section here, there's a couple of things that I just want to go through. And this, some of these issues deal with infrastructure that we would look at in terms of how we design roads in the future, how we repair a road, or how we upgrade a road, and also how subdivision roads are designed. And a lot of the issues would also be the drainage features of a road on that. We all know that the worst enemy of any roadway is water. Water that's not drained away properly from the finished road surface. And a lot of the things that we're talking about here is some of the issues that we have that cause concerns, that degrade roadways. And some of the things that we would look at in the future is identify those existing roadways where they're in imminent danger of flooding. We're looking at raising road beds. We have a couple of roads in Waldeboro that would be in that situation. But mostly, most of our roads are threatened by inadequate road drainage in terms of the culvert system and also the swales and drainage ways adjacent to the road. And because they collect water not only from the road, but also adjacent property. Sarah?
What I notice about Waldeboro and driving around is that there are a number of areas, I think this is what you're alluding to, where there's swampy area on either side of the road,
Yeah.
on both sides of the road, and the road is sort of not too much higher than that.
Yeah. There's one right down below
I know.
From you, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and there's one, 235, there's a big area
Yeah.
there. So are you saying that the town has identified all of those areas?
Well, we know
Already, or-
about all of them. The one that you were referring to is exacerbated by beavers that clog up the road. But that doesn't take away from the fact that the roadbed is, you know, at the elevation is way too low for the drainage area on both sides of that road. Unfortunately, the only solution in those situations is typically raising the roadbed,
Yeah,
which is extremely expensive
Yeah.
to do.
yeah, how does that get done?
Well, I mean, typically you're abutting a wetland, so you're gonna need permits from the DEP because you're gonna be disturbing adjacent
Yeah.
wetlands. And it's basically adding fill to the roadway, gravel, raising it. And you're, of course, once you raise the road, you have to have slopes that don't wash away, so we're gonna go
Right.
into the wetland areas. And you wanna size that for future, you know, what we're anticipating for future rain events. So right now, MDOT is sizing culverts for the 100-year floodplain. Previously, we were, you know, doing the 25-year floodplain, 25-year, you know, rain events on that there. So we're anticipating those higher.
How much of a percentage?
So is there, oh, I'm
Go
sorry.
ahead, Mike, you were ahead of me.
Is there collaboration, for example, between DEP and sort of natural resources needs and transportation needs?
Well, yeah, they work together, particularly on, you know, on the, you know, the state highway system. Locally, we work with them also. And many times, you know, this becomes a very practical issue, is that we have a road, and when we have to do something with it, everyone recognizes that, you know, it's not the best situation in the world in terms of, you know, we're gonna impact the environment, but it's something that we have to do. So in the future, what we're looking at is try to avoid those situations when we design a new roadway, to make sure that we accommodate, you know, what would be the future runoff potential in that particular. We're already in shoreline zoning. We're not supposed to put roads in the shoreline 100-foot area, the 100-foot buffer
Yeah.
area. So we have those things in place already on that. So a lot of the things that we're gonna do is, it's on two-track with transportation, and that is to adjust our existing standards to mitigate or eliminate issues in the future. And some of that is making sure we, you know, have more stringent drainage controls for roads, that our stormwater standards are, you know, are factoring in for the higher rain events, longer duration, you know, of a rain event, and also that we're not putting roads in areas that are prone to flooding or, you know, things like that. And then the second tact is addressing the problem areas. And this is where it becomes extremely expensive, and the only way a municipality can financially, or, you know, reasonably attack this problem is to develop basically a capital improvements plan. So you identify the roads, you put money aside, so that when you tackle a road, you don't address it just to meet today's need. You anticipate that, you know, this area will continue, you know, to flood, so we want to build the road up in that, you know, for using that example, to an elevation that won't be impacted in the future on that.
And are all roads, do you know the answer to this? I mean, there's some roads, drive around, you can't drive in the spring,
Yeah, yeah.
not in a you know, a good-sized truck. So are all roads basically new roads, or if they're doing work on roads, are they
You mean like
trying
a
to get-
posted road?
Like
yeah,
posted
posted
roads,
road, are they trying
yeah.
to get rid of that situation, or is it case by case?
No, you know, most of, you know, there are certain roads we have to keep open. You know, typically if there are state routes, they're generally, you know, generally those are kept open for the most part. But many municipal roads, because of the condition, towns will post them because people go over them with heavy equipment, they just degrade the road. In situations like that, typically that's, you know, indicative of a poor subbase or inadequate drainage on that particular road. Again, the solutions for those things are extremely expensive, because typically you're adding, you know, a new base to the road and, you know, those costs. So we whittle away at those, on those road systems very slowly. So when you identify the problem areas, as you mentioned, Sarah, is you try to prioritize those that, need the most attention, and some you can get at later. And this kind of segues also into a brief discussion of culverts. Culverts are one of the items that are grossly undersized, typically for two reasons, because they weren't sized for the future rain events. Typically some of these culverts are 15 or 18 inches. We still see 12-inch culverts out there. They're just totally inadequate. And then some of our cross culverts, that particularly those that transverse streams from either side of the road, those are typically undersized, so we're dealing with stormwater issues, and also we impede the passage of aquatic life and even other mammals, going through. So the solution is to put, larger culverts in.
Actually, it's interesting too, and with Sarah here, the water, the fish life, that I was just up in the 100-mile wilderness, which is 20 miles southwest of Katahdin, and happened to see a talk on replacing the culverts, because what happens is, especially for brook trout and salmon, the culvert gets overloaded with a large flow, and it erodes the base where the water comes out. And they showed pictures of the ends of culverts that are now like this high off of the ground, and the fish. So there's absolutely enormous watersheds up there that have been inaccessible to the fisheries. So what they've done is they actually have a very inexpensive bridge. They're replacing the culverts with bridges that are actually very inexpensive. I don't think they would work here, but they actually are built to withstand logging trucks. Full logging trucks can go over these bridges, and they've replaced already a couple of hundred culverts with these bridges, and have opened up the watershed again to the trout and potentially salmon. So
That's an excellent solution.
it would be a good solution. I don't know whether that's something doable from a DOT standpoint, but it would really be great if that could be done.
When they do replace them, and they oversize them, and for a lot of reasons, but it's extremely expensive. The state offers through DEP a culvert grant. It's grossly underfunded compared to the need, but towns can, submit grant applications to replace culverts, and there's a rating, based on if the culvert's impeding, if it's impeding aquatic life, right now, and they're prioritized for your funding. But typically the cost, I'll just give you an example, is, sometimes a 48-inch culvert crossing a typical roadbed, no more than 30 feet, we're talking in excess of $90,000.
90.
Yeah, it's outrageously expensive for the equipment and the construction. So if we can find a more cost-effective solution, that would be wonderful. So that kind of slows down, the way, the ability to remedy all of these situations as we go along. But again, with that is the proactive point, is that making sure our ordinances are written in such a way so that when we put a culvert in initially, it's sized properly to accommodate. Because if it's in properly and sized properly, it can last a long time without replacement and things like that. So those are the two big issues, dealing with transportation. And also just with stormwater itself, and we touched on it very briefly, and it's something we spent a lot of time in the comp plan process, is that we need, at least here in Waldoboro, is upgrade our standards so that we are sizing our systems in such a way that accommodates the increased rainfall in terms of amount and frequency and things like that, and also that we offer a larger kind of menu of best management practices for dealing with stormwater.
What can we actually do about culvert sizing as far as the planning board goes? I mean, if someone has an issue, if they're putting in a new property and they have to talk to DOT, is DOT going to address that specifically, or where does that come into play?
Yeah, there's two ways of looking at that, Barbara. One is that our ordinance performance standards need to have these things built in. So it's not like this isn't a bargaining. You meet a certain standard, and
Right.
that's what you have to put in. In some areas where we're dealing with existing situations, sometimes you have to kind of try to do the best you can. There may be situations where they can't size the culvert properly for a variety of reasons. So you try to beat the highest standard that you possibly can. But one thing that we don't do in our ordinance is that some of the newer BMPs for stormwater take kind of a more, I'll use the word, a graduated kind of approach. In the past, we've liked to view our stormwater systems more as like structural, like big retention ponds. And the emphasis now is on smaller systems, but different ones, so that we're not depending on just one structure, that we're depending on a variety of things that work within the landscape, work within the particular geography, topography, of the area. So it reduces the the failure potential of one big.
Right.
How competent do you consider the University of Maine Department of Transportation, Civil Engineering in providing adequate details for making this work positively?
Oh, I think in Maine, we're real lucky to have the engineering department at the
Exactly.
University of Maine.
Some of my friends were graduated from that.
Civil engineering
Yeah.
division there. I mean, they do terrific. A lot of the bridge innovations that have come out directly from the university. So, I mean, our MDOT system, a lot of things that come out that get tried, come from the university. So we're pretty good that way.
That's what I thought.
And there's a lot of innovation going out in the northern states, New Hampshire, Vermont, Minnesota, Wisconsin. They have similar climates to ours. We're all faced with kind of like some of the same conditions. So, there's a lot of good work out there.
With this in mind, for businesses going in that then have to address, with a parking lot or
Yeah.
just reducing the permeability of the ground, having a system to handle that. We just did that one for the storage
Yeah.
facility going in.
Actually, I don't know if you've gone by it, but it looked pretty good.
I haven't
Yeah.
checked it out yet, but is there any, given this in mind, is the state likely to change their requirements for those kind of systems? Because our ordinance basically follows their requirements.
Yeah, well, what we would need to do is we have to adjust our standards a bit more, so that we're designing to the higher rainfall events.
And the state is not doing that right now?
The state's doing it, but we're not doing
Okay.
it on that. And also specify the use of more BMPs, give developers more choices of BMPs. So again, for instance, if you have, let's just give an example. We take water that flows from a development, all right, and we put it in like a swale, and the water overflows the swale into a vegetative area on that, and we want to make sure it doesn't channelize or whatever. But if there's a heavy flow, we may direct it into a stone line, a swale, and then because that stone will help, reduce the velocity. And then as it goes further downhill, if we're not at elevation, we might put in maybe a plunge pool. So the water drops and settles into this, small pond or structure, and it captures sediment, and then as the water rises in it, it's not as turbulent anymore, because it, goes into this container, and then it goes out, and we've reduced the velocity. So, and then it might go into another buffer strip. So you have these series of stormwater treatment systems that, some of them work passively.
Sometimes those have to be surrounded by chain link fences though, right?
No, not necessarily, no.
So the thing in front of the Sherwin-Williams and Damascotta,
Yeah, I'm
is
not
that-
quite sure
what
why
is
they
that
do
about?
that, yeah.
That's
Most of the time, we would design those type of structures, the water would only go up to, a relatively low level on that there. And they're designed so when water does go in there, it rises slowly. It's not like a stream where it gets a rapid amount of water from like a dam overflowing or something like that, so. But there's those types of strategies that you would use And each of them are less expensive, that we're working with the topography, and some of them are, we design them so we can service them. You know, so areas where, like a plunge pool, we want to be able to get at it to remove sediment that might get captured there. So we want to design it so we can get a backhoe in there easily and things like that. So all those things, and that's why, you know, using those more contemporary BMPs and making sure that we're specifying that we want people to use those is very important. It also will help reduce cost.
So
'Cause the
generally,
cost-
Bill, if you're going from a 25-year or 50-year culvert to a 100-year, what's the percentage increase in size?
In size,
Do you
well-
have a feel for that?
A lot's going to depend on your watershed that you're draining, but I'll give you an example. For one culvert that we replaced, it was, we went from, I guess it was two 18-inch culverts set side by side, which were failing, and, you know, and we put in, I think it was a 60-inch culvert that was able to handle that. Now, it's not just the size, but it's also the design. It was kind of an arch culvert. We set them down into the base of the waterway, so we're at the same elevation, so we eliminate that problem.
Of the change of grade?
You know, there, so there was a lot of factors involved, and there was some work on the outlet and inlet
Yeah.
to reduce that. So there is, with those culverts, you know, that kind of work, as I mentioned before, it's kind of shocking, the costs that are involved, you know. And some of that too is that, you know, we're taking up a roadway, you know, there's some other costs. So there is a significant, now, if we're building new,
Gonna be in
it
there
won't
anyway.
be as expensive because we're not dealing with, you know, the disturbance to an existing road and things like that. And we may potentially use another strategy, you know, a bridge or something like that, if that's doable. But those are some of the highlights of what's that are unique or more problematic to us here in Waldoboro on that. One other thing I'd like to mention for, just because we live along the coast, is that drinking water is something that's impacted. This is more problematic to some of the peninsulas, but the rain events that we're seeing are frequent and heavy rains, which create a lot of runoff, which means that water is not, you know, percolating down into the groundwater supply. You know, it's running off. So some of our, you know, aquifers aren't getting as recharged as often, which can impede, you know, or create problems, particularly along peninsulas. And also, sea level rise impacts the saltwater intrusion into some of those areas, you know. And that is a problem also in Waldoboro, potentially, in some of our homes that can't go, if they don't have a lot of property and they can't put wells in more inland away from the salt water. So that is another issue that's impacted by the different rain events on that. But that's all I wanted to cover. I mean, there's a lot of other things in here, but those are some of the key elements that we would be looking at here. Are there any other questions? I know I went through that kind of fast.
So I at least have one action item here. It seems to me that in our LUO, there's related to the water runoff remediation, we need to look at, if the state's changed theirs, we need to look at modifying ours to comport with that, correct?
We need to redo our entire stormwater standard.
Yeah.
Completely, yeah. And also make sure it connects with the state, Chapter 500 standards on that there. So
Okay.
there's quite a bit of changes that we would need to do.
But how do you evaluate best management practices as alternative? I mean, how do you
know which is,
yeah.
the best management practices, when they're published, will tell you, there's always a matrix that tells you what situations you would use these. So the engineer would select one that's based on, a number of factors, the size of the watershed, the topography in the land, things like that, how they're used in combination. So basically, you use them based on, kind of like engineering specs or that tell you, what's best.
So are we gonna import the state's rules into our ordinance? Is that basically what we're doing, or do you see us doing anything different from the
Well,
state?
we're going to complement the state rules, we're going to use those, but we're probably going to go a little further in terms of specifying certain BMPs. But, when we specify a BMP though, it's a book that has
So
maybe 30.
BMP has to be stricter than the state. I mean, isn't that our?
No, they would technically be used also. But
Oh.
the BMP is just an engineering standard, and we would adopt them and say, this is the place where you look for your best management practice on that. So, and they would choose, we would specify exactly which one. They would choose those that work better for their site. We also would put in there a provision that allows them to be creative too. So they can say to us, we're gonna design something different, but we'll have the same net effect as your BMP. Now that they could do, and they would just have to show us that it works just as well. And many times, they may be able to craft a solution that would work much better, and we want to give them that opportunity. But what this does is that it expands, the thinking and the design quality of stormwater features. So we're not telling them exactly what they have to do, but we're telling them this is the boundaries where you're going to look for your. Does that make sense, Barbara?
I guess it does, but it still comes down to evaluating an engineering plan but ultimately the state reviews it, right? Isn't that what happens?
Some of them, not all of them. No, the state reviews stormwater if it exceeds a certain size for the development. Otherwise, we look at them.
Okay.
On some of the larger ones, they do, but not all of them. Not all of them. Now, a key feature that we're going to look at is that, and this goes back to our emphasis on a watershed approach, is that, and it's something that not just Waldoboro, but many towns don't do, is we want, stormwater and erosion control to be handled, to be addressed by everyone, not just big development.
Right.
So depending on the scale of your development, it's going to be very simple to do to something much more complicated if you're dealing with a very large development with a lot of impervious area. Because that's something we don't do very well.
Yep.
And Waldoboro's not the only one on that.
So the best management practices in this area are coming from where? Are those state developed, or is that?
No, they come from, a lot of different sources.
Okay.
They're basically, they're techniques that are proven out in the field.
Okay.
Engineering, by engineers, and they document them and they put them together in a single book or source.
Okay. But in terms of having a particular applicant meet a reasonable requirement for storm runoff, that sort of engineering comparison we're not going to be able to make, right? In other words, we can have our ordinance match the state's requirements and then provide references to these
Right.
best management practices, but we're not going to be designing systems for
No, you can't design systems,
Right.
yeah. But what will happen is that the best management practices, there's a variety of them. So if someone's building a garage next to a stream or next to a steep slope that drains into something, and that's all it is, it's a small 20 by 24 foot garage, he's going to be able to select BMPs that are suitable for that type and scale of development. And some of those are going to be very, very easy to implement. If I was building a 100,000 square foot building, I'm going to deal with something much more complicated on that. So some of these can be done without an engineer. They're relatively simple on that there. In other situations,
Okay.
it's a different approach that we have been using. It's just more comprehensive. It gives people much more flexibility in how they design things, and it's more, it works.
So this action item to to make these modifications to the ordinance would be, again, part of the
Yeah.
part of the
When
process
we redo
of,
the entire, land,
Okay.
that's gonna happen in that time. Because we're also looking at erosion control, stormwater, we're looking at our road standards, our culvert standards.
Yep.
They all kind of fit together.
Sure.
on that there.
okay.
But that's all I would, go through the document. There are a couple of other interesting sections, but I didn't want to go through everything. Just wanted to highlight the ones that are probably most problematic or critical for us here in Walden.
Okay.
Does anyone have any other questions?
I have a question. I'm looking at the word subdivision. We haven't had one in years. But what is actually the definition? Is it 2 or more lots? I mean,
Well,
I'm sure it's
I
in
can
there.
whip out the definition right now.
Yeah,
In a nutshell.
In a nutshell would be
The,
good.
the definition is the creation of the third lot.
Okay.
However,
Period.
Creation of a third
well,
lot.
yeah, just let's not get into that for a minute. It's the creation of a third lot. But the definition also goes on to say, it's not only creating a lot, it's when we create something by lease or division. So we could create a strip mall, and each person owns a portion of the strip mall. That would be considered a subdivision on that, So it's, and it also means multifamily housing, when we're purchasing, individual housing unit. But the state law says that if a town has an alternative way of looking at multifamily housing, like a site review process, you can elect not to go through subdivision and just use your site review for multifamily properties on that. Now,
Is
the
our
law.
ordinance say that
Yeah, it
right
does,
now?
yeah.
Okay.
There are exceptions to the subdivision law, and one of them is that there's a 5-year period where the slate wipes clean, so that if I have a parcel of land and I split it in 2 and wait 5 years, I can split it again on that. But there are also other exclusions, and they could be if I have a piece of property and I live on, and my home's on one, and I've lived there for 5 years, I can split, and I can split again, because that property that I live on with the home that's there doesn't count as a lot. Now, the only thing that counts is that you also go 5-year forward, so that if I sold and moved away, I would have to have that split amended as a subdivision. It also excludes action of the court, so if the court says, if there's a legal dispute and the court splits the land, that's excluded. Land that is divided, like as a divorce decree or something like that, is also excluded. And we also exclude land that's sold to an abutting property owner. So if
Wait a
if
minute,
I,
land in a divorce, what do you mean? Is it, it's
If it's
divided
there-
into 2?
if there's a divorce settlement and the court splits the property, we
Yeah.
don't count that split as triggering the subdivision law.
So both of those lots could then go divide into 2?
No,
But
if-
your
if-
place
if-
is already, you can divide a lot into
Right,
2.
but the court may divide it into other parcels, more than 2.
Oh, I see.
But that split doesn't trigger the subdivision, we exempt
Okay.
that parcel.
Oh, I see.
Also, gifts are exempt under certain conditions.
Hmm.
So you can gift a parcel, I can give you a parcel of land, the only thing is, thank you, and that, but.
Well, I'll
he would
take
have to
one.
keep it for- oh, yeah, you too. But he would have to keep that land for 5 years. If he didn't, then he would trigger the subdivision law. So there are, it's the creation of the third lot, but then we have to look at all the exemptions that go into play. So something simple we just made very complicated.
Okay.
good, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Couple more items. So, shoreland ordinances, for the benefit of the audience. And Sarah, you don't have to, neither of you have to say, okay.
Great.
This is
I just
fascinating.
want to make sure. that, So, we have been working on modifying our Article 7, which is our shoreland zoning, and Article 10, which is on non-conforming properties, to make them, the state has made a lot of changes since our last change, so we edited those and tried to make them clearer, and so we've made a lot of changes to those. Then the one area where everything is pretty well agreed to as a board, with the exception of continuing discussion on a section related to setbacks for manure storage, crop growing and tillage, which the current setback is 100 feet from the water. So we've had some discussions, and there was a discussion with the Board of Selectmen, and we got some input from the compliance person at the Department of Agriculture with the state regarding the basis for the 100-foot setback and where that came from. And so his recommendation was that it had been changed. They had changed it from 75 to 100 feet based on work that's been done, but it was quite some time ago. So I think we had some further discussions a little bit last time. So I think that there's three, I would break this up into three parts. I think there's three pieces on the table, and we can add to this or change it as you wish. So the first question is whether we want to accept the 100-foot recommendation, which is what the state has and what the compliance person at the Ag Department said, or if we don't. And if we change that and make it more restrictive, it has to go back to the state for their approval.
I don't understand why it would have to. It would have to if it conflicted with farming rights or agricultural rights.
Yeah, anything that
Because
you,
we are allowed to make things stricter than the state.
any change
any-
that goes beyond
Yeah.
what's on the books has to get pre-approved.
Okay.
or
By the state.
Yeah.
And
but
part of
it's
that,
typical.
he was, right, yeah.
Ted's
And
got it.
part of that, he was suggesting that, but go ahead.
I just think that we've got to pay attention to test results, understanding provable contamination, and make sure that that's how we're verifying whatever we're doing. We need to carefully monitor regularly in various directions, like in the clam flats, around the clam flats and so on, as to what test results we're getting from where things are located.
Right.
And I don't consider the 100-foot to be the perfect answer as to what test results we have to modify.
Well, and I think there's multiple strategies. I think
Yes.
everybody's heart's in the right place. When we talked as well, I see your third, intro to Waldeboro, but we also talked about better outreach, because no matter what you do, whether you change it on paper or whether you monitor it on the back end, if you're not actually trying to educate people on the front end about preserving our water quality, then you are dealing with it on the back end, and then that's a travesty in its own right. So,
Right, and I want to go back to this, because I said there were three things, so that's one of them. One of them is the whole issue of
We're
what the
ready.
number is and what we should do. The second one was we had some discussion about adding in references to best management practices, which there was some, for example, there's a BMP for manure storage that we could add the reference in, and we could, maybe there's others that we could
Into our
add.
ordinance. Into the ordinance.
Into the ordinance itself is add references
Department
to.
of Ag already has those.
Yeah,
Yeah, they already have.
sure, so then you could even refer like we have other references in the ordinance to see the main state
Yeah.
something or other, we could refer them to the best management practices for those. And then the third thing that we talked about was education of the townspeople, which and what we might want to do along those lines. So, so we have all of those to wrestle with at one point or another. And if we can pick off one or two of them tonight,
I
we still
didn't
want to
see
leave
this on
time for
the
the
agenda,
intro.
actually, when the email was sent out earlier. Was this added
That was
recently?
sent out, and then I think
Because.
and then I think I got an email from, it was either Susan or Scott saying they wanted to add this on.
Yeah, I asked that you add these, but so.
Yes, so
it's
when I
new,
initially
yeah.
sent out that agenda, I didn't hear anything, and then when I got back on Friday,
Okay, so in other words, I came unprepared because I just saw the first one.
Yeah, that's okay.
And then for this.
Well, you don't have
this-
to hash it out tonight, but. I
Right,
just-
right. Because I'd like a little time, still.
Yeah.
And I think we have it even with Bob Butler's
Oh,
comment.
yeah.
Yeah, that we can do a little bit more thinking about this.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I guess I thought one of the things we were gonna talk about tonight was that, was the draft that you had sent us, Max,
Yeah,
for the.
yeah, that was the
that's
other,
next.
that was the second item
Great.
they
Mhm.
asked to throw in there.
That's 13 pages now. I mean, it's double spaced, but it's long. I was gonna print it out. It's like, oh my God, another 15 pages of town stuff.
I did, in fact, print it out
Yeah.
at the expense of,
They're the ones who insisted on
I know,
having
but it's
HP
good.
ink.
But boy, it's thorough.
So we raised this, or is this the same document that we raised at EDC recently?
Yes.
Okay, so Julie's feedback, as succinctly as possible, was
wait,
just that it
wait.
needed to be a flow chart.
Yeah,
Or pictures, or.
yeah.
oh, well,
cartoons. Yeah.
that's the
Yeah.
that's the
Yeah.
next subject. Let's
Yeah,
finish
we're
this.
jumping all over the
Yeah,
place
we're-
now.
yeah.
We're trying to wrap up by 7:30.
I guess so, wow. It's Red Sox played last night, we don't even have to worry about that.
Flow chart. Is it possible to do it in a flow chart?
Like a
Let's-
logic model or something, I
Yeah,
don't
there's
know.
kind of a lot of different tendrils.
Yeah,
She had a good theory, which was no one was going to look at it and they were just going to ask Max anyway. I agree.
well, let's go back
Or
to,
Stan.
let's go back to the shoreline for a minute, because if,
Okay, sorry.
so I understand if we don't want to go through this thoroughly tonight, that's fine, I'm sorry for lack of, to get a chance to prepare. But relative to these three items relative to the shoreline setback, changing, leaving it at 100 or potentially changing it, I think adding the,
Best
do we
management
agree, the
practices.
sort of the basic idea of adding at least references to the state for best management practices, something that seems reasonable to do. We can certainly
Yeah.
go through the language at some point.
Mm-hmm.
So you comfortable with that, Bill? You have a
Yeah, we
interesting
just
look
have to
on it.
word it properly.
Okay,
Because, yeah, and that should not be a problem,
Okay.
because they use these BMPs anyway.
yep,
So as long as we're not, I mean, there's a lot of them though, too. So we're just going to deal generically with BMPs as, used by the Department of Ag for dealing with manure and related, issues on
Okay.
that. Because they technically have the enforcement authority
right.
dealing, so. We just can't be seen as specifying. If we refer, make people aware they're there.
I'll get to you in a second, Sarah. That was an interesting, you mentioned that they have the enforcement authority. So does that put the state in the position, if we were to change the enforcement meaning following best management practices?
No, we just want to make sure that they're the ones that, if someone calls with a complaint against a farmer, we don't enforce that. We call it the Department of Ag. They come out and deal, they assess the situation. If there's a remedy, they will work with the farmer to
Okay.
use a BMP to, mitigate or eliminate the problem.
Okay.
So, but they do that with the farmer.
So,
We're kind of overstepping.
but, well, if we change the setback, then we're asking the state to enforce our setback requirement on a farmer.
That's why they have to approve it.
Okay. Sarah, you were next to that.
I'm just curious what the average longevity of any addition of the shoreline zoning ordinance is. Like how many years ahead are we making this, would we be changing this for?
Sarah, they'll make annual changes, small ones. But they typically, the larger changes come, average every 5 or 10 years. A lot of times they'll make small ones and they won't, ask us to, modify our ordinances until it grows to a certain amount.
Oh, okay, so the state makes changes.
That's right, to the model ordinance, yeah.
At certain intervals.
Based
and
on
then the
test
town-
results.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, a lot of reasons, complaints, issues that come up that weren't addressed. And they go through a public hearing process. And then they finally, and they implement the model, and then we get it, and we're given a certain amount of time to update our local ordinances.
There must be some way, though, of referencing, because, people don't think about it. I mean, when you started your agriculture project, did you think about going to the website for the agriculture department and do stuff? I mean, I've been doing it for 7 years. I never thought to go look and see where I'm,
No.
So, we're reasonably,
the-
conscientious, but, it never occurred to me, so.
Yeah. Which again goes to the education of townspeople thing. Go ahead.
No, I just have a clarifying question because, so when we were talking about stormwater standards, I'm assuming that was DEP when you talked about chapter 500 and you said that the town was empowered and or allowed to select from several of their best management practices and enforce them up to a certain point. But with Department of Ag, we are not allowed to select best management practices. They are allowed to enforce, and they can select a best management practice if it's part of some sort of corrective action plan. Did I get all that correct? Okay, I just wanted
That's a
to.
unique situation.
All right.
What you just mentioned is maybe the venue for alerting people to BMPs for farming or whatever is not in the ordinance, but a separate pamphlet that goes, it's on the website, that's with the land use ordinances. We could even put it in it, but it would be a separate place that, if you do agriculture, here's a list of resources. If you're working in the shorefront, here's a list of resources. Something like that, that could be just a resource. Some
But
towns
how-
do that.
How would somebody know they needed to know something? I mean, like,
That's a lifelong question.
That's a good
leave it to me to come up with that. But I mean, seriously, people, I hear people talking about, I want to get animals, I want to do this, I want to do that. But I don't know that they ever, I mean, I'm assuming they're being sincere, but I don't know that they thought, well, what do I need to know to do this?
There's a lot of this information we don't have to invent. It's out there.
Yeah.
It's probably pulling it together, maybe synthesizing it, and putting it on a couple of venues like our website. Make it as an introduction, an insert into the land use ordinance. Hand it out. Have the code officer it available for the code officer to hand out, or just make sure it's out there or available to people as they need it. I don't know what more you could do in terms of.
Well,
At least linking the
can
website.
I throw out a wild and crazy idea?
Sure.
If somebody has gets a dog, they're supposed to register their dog. If somebody has a farm with
Gotcha.
animals, could they be required to register just to let the town know what they have?
That's a crazy idea.
I thought so. I mean, I know.
Well, actually,
I have a
the
rooster.
assessor knows.
I'm sorry?
The assessor tabulates all the farm properties.
I know, but
You
that,
can easily send something out.
Yeah.
yeah, but I
But there are a
think,
lot of people with animals, like a couple horses that
Oh,
don't,
yeah,
aren't
yeah.
listed
Yeah.
as a farm, right?
Yeah.
You might not get everything, but
Right.
you
Yeah.
use what you have.
yeah,
you know.
yeah.
That's not a bad idea.
I mean,
Or instead of you want to have a commercial business in Waldeboro, the next pamphlet is, so you wanted to have a farm in Waldeboro.
Yeah.
What? Why are you laughing?
Nothing.
Why are you laughing?
Actually,
There must be
there's a lot
reason.
of farm activity.
Yeah.
I want to see Barbara lead that committee.
but
What?
I want to see you lead that committee, and I want to join it.
So you two are smiling, is that what's going on here?
I'm wondering
I
how many
thought
packets
that-
there are gonna be.
Huh?
So
Wondering how
many
packets
packets.
there are gonna be.
Oh, I know, exactly.
There's the
So you
ones.
want to start an eel farm, all
Honestly.
right.
Well,
Just
but it
kidding.
is a bit,
So-
I know, it's crazy, but,
well,
There'll be a packet for every business in this country.
and I don't want to be big brother here either, so.
yeah, I
it's
don't
nuts.
either, but there's this, I don't know whether it's a myth or whatever in Waldeboro, but the thing is, if you go in and request a sign, you need to get a sign ordinance, the town automatically knows you have a business, and that's how they find out that they can tax you. But if you don't put a sign out there and just do something discreetly, you're under the radar. Is that like a myth, or is that like what
No,
happened?
I mean,
That's what happened. I mean, I'm not saying it's right or wrong or good or bad, I'm just saying that,
Right, what
Well,
triggers
well,
certain levels of, at what point, it's like anything, it's, at what level is it a problem? Scale.
and at what
Right.
level is it necessary to know?
Yeah.
well, take a look at the big picture here. I mean, you had mentioned, or Ted had mentioned, we're concerned about water quality, particularly for clamming. That's a big Waldeboro issue.
Yeah.
But if we keep it a big issue, and then, everybody likes our clams, so let's frame the discussion that way, and then whittle down into, hey, if you're farming, do your bit. If you're walking your dog, pick up your poop along the river, or, I mean, everybody has a role to play. If you're building, don't create erosion. If you frame it in that context, then it's not an enforcement, it's we're all partners in this together.
It's a community issue as opposed
Yeah.
to.
Yeah.
Now, we still have to have our ordinances, but again, it's a different approach, just.
Well, the issue is really what's the, and I'm guessing that that we need more than one way to educate people. Handouts, whenever people come, and buy property in the town, links on the website. I think because I think just some brief things on those topics would be very helpful. If it was something that we can write up that is at least available, and if it's less than a page or a half a page for each of these key, for farms, businesses, animals, shoreland stuff, shouldn't be that hard. What you want to do is at least drive people to talk to the code enforcement officer or Max about these things and raise the issue and get help. That's really what you want.
We have the Soil Water Conservation Service right up the road.
Yes.
Cooperative Extension. We could tap them into doing a workshop here, right,
yeah.
Periodically. That might
Yeah.
draw people or just gain interest.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, relative to that, I think, I like those ideas, and having something that we can have printouts of and put on the website. Let's think about that. We can
search.
we can
There's
start
stuff
some work
off
on
the
that.
shelf
Yeah,
that we can
Yeah.
search.
yeah, if you can find some
Yeah.
stuff,
There's a lot.
dig it
of,
out. Okay.
Can things be
that'd
sent out
helpful.
with people's tax bills? Because that seems to me that would probably be the largest, most general mailing to reach
Yeah,
most
we
number.
didn't, yes, that would work. Depends on how they send it out. If it's in an envelope, it's easier to slip something, and sometimes it's in that,
Oh, yeah.
pre-thing.
It's in an envelope.
Yeah, then we can't.
Yeah, it's in a note.
Yeah, I think that's,
Yeah.
because what was it, 800, we talked about it last, $800 or something to
Yeah.
do a mailing, so.
Yeah.
Since we have no budget, then scarfing off of
Putting it on
the tax
web,
bill would be great.
Making it
Yeah,
attractive.
yeah, but I
Although I
think
have a
you
lot
need
of neighbors who
multiple,
don't have
people don't
websites.
always.
And, we're old here,
Who don't have what?
websites.
Don't have websites or
Or
computers?
that's what I
Yeah.
meant to say,
Yeah.
computers.
Yeah.
Well, we did talk about, and one, it gets back to how important is the issue. So if we make it important, then people either find the time to go out and talk, that Julie and I generally will sit there and talk about where should we show up if we want to talk to everybody about how important things are.
Transfer station.
Yeah, transfer station. Every Saturday, just sit out there and say, okay, we're going to talk about the most important issue in Waldeboro this week. So, and that's resource time, but, so it's technically free. But yeah, if you did want to spend money, then I do think branding, having a catchy slogan of some kind. I generally have terrible, cheesy ideas. The one I came in with is like, got poo, now what do you do? Or something like that, but it'll stick in people's brains. But something, or, you know, something around clamming or clean water, or just to keep people remembering to do
We
what
should
they
put
have
a
to do.
notice board up at the transfer station, you know? That's a
Right.
very good idea. You know, 'cause it's true, that's where everybody goes.
Yeah.
Is that or the post
I've never
office? I
been
think
there.
I see everybody there.
Was it?
Waldeboro building.
What? I know.
Yeah, I think people go there more often than the town hall. A lot of folks go there more.
This is true. Thank you for coming.
Okay, 7:19.
Whoa, okay. Thank you. Time, please. So I think that's enough on that. Any other comments on that? But I think next time we get to this subject, I think breaking down these
Okay.
topics, and if we can get some, if Max and Bill can dig up some things for us to look at, if you can send them ahead of time, so we have a chance to look at, depending on how much you find, that'd be helpful. So, let's talk about intro to Waldeboro.
Have you done a lot of work since you handed it out to us on it already, Max?
Yes, two ways. First of all, do you want to say what happened at the EDC meeting?
I thought I did. I thought we just skipped
Well,
over
yeah,
the
but-
rest of it.
Yeah.
Well, just, please, let's go back to that. I was thinking
Uh,
other thoughts.
They still feel a lot of ownership of this document and want to continue to help and have some oversight, was my takeaway. Ted, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. But other than that, there was a general sense that it was too long. If anything, it should be some sort of flow chart. That's what the 13 pages should be boiled down to. We could put it up on the website. We still fully and would want people to want a welcoming voice such as Max's when they come to the town and have, or Stan's when they come to the town and have questions. But ideally, no one's going to read 13 pages. It does need to be one page, probably.
Yeah.
One page. So,
It's good
for
though.
everybody, this is,
I found
this
it
is,
clarifying.
the intent of this was really for someone coming in, interested in starting a business in Waldeboro.
Correct.
So, if I compare this
To the ordinance?
I will note that we do
To
not deal
this,
with all businesses.
to
I
try to
noticed
take
Golden Wall was
this
here.
and make one page, you're, I mean, if you want to, this would be my suggestion, because I thought this was really good.
I did too.
I thought that if you put all the tables that you intend to put into it at the end, you know, table 1, table 2, so it doesn't clutter up the text. If I was a new person coming to Waldeboro wanting to start a business, that I could, if you can drill this down to a page, go to it, great. You're still gonna need this.
drilling it down
'cause-
page.
Because
Oh, let's
if you,
see it.
let's see it, this would be great.
This was
This
was a really last minute flow chart, and Susan and I apologize.
take
So,
out
oh,
Perfect.
Max, this is fantastic.
This is great.
Yeah, he identified the process, not
Yeah.
the detail.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, obviously
process
needs to be
get you
pretty.
started.
Well, yeah, so take, so this,
You don't have
no,
room
no,
for
no.
welcome to Waldeboro, you have to get rid of that.
Yeah.
We can get
Yeah,
an electronic
yeah,
copy.
right.
Would you like mine?
So, but in my view, I love this, but I like this too. This does not obviate the need for this.
I
If you
agree.
put these two together, this is good.
So what I said at the
You could link it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
What I said at the EDC meeting is the flow chart would be a nice little quick thing for the person who needs to just get a quick review and thinks they can do it, have all the resources at their fingertips, good for them. But
I'm gonna build a shed this weekend. Do I need a permit? Yes, no. I'm gonna start a business this weekend. Do I need anything? Yes, no.
The point of the flow chart is you look at that, look at the ordinance, you can put 2 to 2 together, hopefully. But then there was the packet that I did a bit of work on, because what I worry about is if, say, I got hit by a bus on my way home tonight, and Bill is too busy to be at Waldeboro every day, you know, if they want to get an intern person, who are they gonna have doing all the work? Because when we showed up, and I had to rely on when information was saved, there wasn't that much information saved. So it was, I don't know if you guys remember the first few meetings, but it was pretty bad for me setting it up, which,
You did fine.
yeah.
They're great.
But, you know, getting the right papers, getting an idea of what approval people need and what process it is, like even in the packet, I think I updated it and Susan has the better one now. But it sort of goes through what the person has to do, the timelines, the papers, waivers, all that stuff. That was more of just a personal little booklet for a future planner. But it can certainly be tagged on to a person who wants a more in-depth look without reading through the entire
Yeah,
ordinance.
well, and the point is, this actually is a good intro
Yeah.
to then, if you need to, that you know what you're doing, a little bit of frame of reference before you go into the land use ordinance, so I think
The
it's,
flow chart's supposed to be like the summary, the booklet will be the Sparks notes, and then the ordinance will just be the full book.
yeah, I think it's great.
So the only thing I was thinking, looking at it, is, I mean, it does start up in the first, and I don't have a print with me, the first paragraph or two talking about if you want to open a commercial operation. But you mentioned in passing a home-based business, but maybe a quick definition of home-based business is up to X number of employees, some kind of definition between the two.
I might have seen
Yeah,
that
you
and changed
probably
it to
have.
just projects in general, because even if it's because in the ordinance it does mention residential purposes and agriculture, and I should have changed it to that, because even if you're just building a shed somewhere, you'll need a building permit, which is something I put in the flow chart there.
Over 100 square feet, 100
Yeah.
square feet or larger, yeah.
Good. Okay,
Awesome.
anything else on this?
So do you have a date that you're trying to get this wrapped up by?
The flow chart?
Yeah, and the whole 13-page thing, I mean,
What 13-page thing? This is 5 pages.
Yeah,
What are you
Susan,
talking about?
that's what I meant. That was the new thing that I finished. When I did the flow chart, I still wanted to have that, so that's an updated version. That
This
will
is
be,
an update of a
that's an
13-page version.
Yes, and I knew you were gonna ask for a hard copy, so I decided to give that
Yeah.
to you. So I'm gonna email everyone the new updated one.
Okay,
is it double-spaced, Susan, or single?
Double space.
Okay, all right, good.
Don't you all have the same one I
No.
have?
no, but you're
Hot
special,
off the press.
don't worry,
We have an
don't
older
worry,
version.
don't worry.
It's in the mail.
Yeah, it's in the mail. Great, so,
But in terms of deadline, it's whenever the EDC wants to get to it.
well,
Really?
why don't you just start using it? From a planning board perspective, we could ask you to give this to prospective business people coming in.
We can do that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
do we need to vote to ask Max to do that?
When we wait for the next month, when he has the,
Final
I haven't
version?
seen the 5-page one,
Okay,
so.
sure,
Yeah, why don't you
Okay.
look at it and comment?
Yeah.
great. And I've
Not
got
approved first.
purely
So-
editorial comments I'll give you after the meeting. Okay.
Can you resend that?
Yep,
to
I'll
us?
resend I'll send the 5-page one.
Okay,
So you'll get 6 pages
Yeah.
with the flow chart.
great. So there was one more item that's related to this, because we had talked about a simplified version of the application process. And I'd asked everybody to think about and come with some ideas, and I have one, and I don't know if anybody else has anything, but I thought about this, and it seemed to me that the thing that we run into the most, that is also the simplest of any of the applications that we get typically, is change of retail use in an existing business location. And if we focused on that as the simplest thing that we get, that we want to have a simplified process, it seems to me for that, you could have a list of the waivers that, typical waivers that you would ask for in that case. If you're not changing the, not changing the site at all, there might be building changes, so you could have a section asking to specify the building changes and sign changes.
Interior or exterior?
Well, this is just an idea, so I'm
Just-
scoping, but I'm thinking that, that we break it down to that minimal case and help lead somebody through the application by already giving them the list of waivers that they're likely to want. And
Can
be
I,
very specific about what you're asking them to provide, assuming they are or aren't making any, because almost like the flow chart, any changes that they're making to the site clearly has to go to the bigger process, but if they're only making interior changes, or, we ought to be able to make a streamlined application pretty easily, I think, if we do that simplest case first.
I'm wondering if it can't be simply a CEO situation if the amount of traffic isn't changing from one business to the next. Is that a reasonable, if it reaches that level where it's the same amount of traffic and it's retail to
that-
retail, does it have to come in front of us at all?
Yeah, typically, that would be an approach, but the board doesn't review interior changes.
No.
Just exterior, just the
Yeah.
site.
Right.
So traffic would be one, lighting, things like that, expansions,
Yeah.
stormwater.
Right.
So, yeah, you could.
Because really, traffic would be the only thing
Yeah.
that would, and otherwise, if they're changing the way they're coming in and off the lot, that'd be DOT, we might, I guess that would trigger coming in front of the planning board, but if everything else is the same,
If it requires an MDOT
Yeah.
permit.
that would.
But we're frequently getting these, though.
I'm saying we shouldn't, unless there's a change in traffic.
Well,
Actually, you probably shouldn't. If
What-
there's
what-
nothing.
what are we
if
doing?
there's
We
nothing,
don't-
you're not really reviewing anything substantive, unless there is a substantive change.
Right,
So we would have to build in some of the triggers.
right.
Can I
I
ask,
guess,
are
I'm
you
try-
discussing the most recent retail that involved like the caregiver stuff, or are you talking other retail facilities?
The former restaurant that was converted to a accounting office, that was a reduction in traffic.
right.
But that wasn't, that was retail to office, wasn't it? Or-
Yeah, that was
restaurant to-
retail, yeah.
Right.
I think that still goes
Into the same
in the same
vein.
category
Okay.
that Scott was going
Yeah.
in. That it's not
Yeah, the
greatly
office
increasing
spaces.
traffic, and there's no real specific
Right, but-
requirements they have to follow other than parking.
Yeah, I guess I would have to go back to and read through the parts of the applicable parts of the ordinance again relative to this question, because I'm not sure it's all that clear that these shouldn't and should just go to the CEO. Because, for example, I mean, part of forcing people to go through the process and come to the planning board is, well, what is the traffic change? What is the likely change of, that,
So it
that's
could
the
be something the
reason.
CEO asks, that would be the trigger for him. at the
Sure,
office.
but I'm not, the question is whether we're allowed as a planning board to
Well, part of the problem is.
let the CEO
standards.
make those
He
decisions.
makes a lot of decisions
Well, I know,
already.
yeah, that's true.
Part of the problem is some of our standards are inadequate. Parking, traffic is one of them. We
Yeah.
really don't have really any standards in there to make that determination. And if we added that, that would help alleviate some of that.
Well, it just does for sight lines, cars per day, the site distances,
Yeah,
that
and that's what
kind
we're,
of
looking.
thing.
That's the trigger there would be,
Yeah.
what are the peak, the state has a trigger that they use.
Yes.
It's 50 vehicles at peak hour.
Right.
Very rarely for these small businesses do we,
Right.
and then vehicles per day.
Yep.
So we could put, we would have to specify in there what would be the trigger to say, all right, they exceed that, what's the existing, and then what would be the new?
Well, I think all that even, I think too, the concern that I would have is the responsibility as well to the town in terms of the abutters as well, to make sure that abutters are seeing a business type change at it, next to them. I just want to make sure that we're following we're doing the right thing.
Well, the key is that having the standards in the ordinance.
Right.
Yeah,
And
that's-
if
you
some
don't
of them are
have them.
vague or they're not
Yeah,
adequate,
if they're not there.
then we have a have an issue. Because even if this form was so simple, I mean, if at some point it does devolve to something that, okay, if you can check all these boxes, you can just go to the CEO. But having that, I think would be helpful to people, and it would be to us, and to certainly applicants coming in to, okay, what kicks it off to the right level? And then you still have a simplified form that people can use rather than going through everything.
Right, right. It's just, the perception is it's more business friendly, the fewer businesses have to come in front of the planning board to do business in town, you know? So it's because it's one less thing and hurdle and all that stuff, and some things are so straightforward
Right.
that.
Yeah, it's true.
Look at impact, not necessarily friendly or not friendly, but if it's higher impact, then we want more thorough review. If it's no or low impact, it can go through another. We can rely solely on the performance standards.
Which are already laid out by the state,
Pardon?
which are already defined by the state to quite a
Well,
degree.
in some areas, in
Yes.
some areas.
Right.
And some of them are relative to us, too.
Okay.
Yeah, too, so.
But if we have a simplified form and a simple process, then it's relatively easy. We're making it easier to come before the planning board if people need to.
Is that what this, and I'm, as long as I've been here, I've never looked it up. Certified business friendly, is that what that refers to? Or parts of it? Make-
I don't want to comment on that.
Fair
Certified
enough.
Business friendly, is that a thing?
Yeah, and the
Oh.
state, different cities are certified business friendly. Waldeboro, not among them.
How-
But I just,
What's their criteria?
that's my curiosity.
okay.
I want to know what the
Hey, there's
criteria is.
criteria.
Yeah, I guess I'm looking at this tomorrow.
Yeah, so I just, are there, you know, they add them every, and I was curious if that was part of it when Barbara's saying, you know, if that, there's a process for getting businesses in the door. I'd be very interested to see what the other standards are in place for other towns and cities in the state.
Is that the governor's award?
Yeah, that was the governor's.
Oh, God.
I don't know when
I
that
don't
got
think they're doing it
implemented.
anymore. I don't think they've done any in a while, so.
It's easier than getting organic certified, that's all I can say. But it would be nice to know if we could qualify for, okay.
Put one more plaque up outside too.
So, what's the takeaway? What should be our action item on this simplified version, CEO versus
We're gonna look
planning
at this
board?
when we redo the land use ordinance, too. So this is a bigger picture. For now, we could do some, but it would be policy, not an ordinance change.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
talking about just having a form that's a,
Yeah.
you know, that we can.
Having a
Prototype.
grid marked application so that people can draw on different
Yeah.
things, bless you. I think that was part of the discussion.
And that's workable, yeah.
Yeah.
So is that something for, it seems to me a first draft of some kind of simplified, you know, retail use change, going through what would qualify and what wouldn't.
Yeah.
Would that be something that a board member should do, or Max, are you willing to take a pass at that?
You did so well with that one
Yeah,
flow
see?
chart,
Well, if you
so.
want something done, ask somebody who's busy.
Welcome to Waldeboro Farm Edition.
I'll give you a-
No, I'm just talking about the simplified form, I think
Yeah.
the,
Right,
the other,
simplified
For a
waiver.
change of use.
simplified
Yeah, like a-
waiver form.
yeah,
We could have something like a matrix, like if you're, well, like a condition. If you're changing a use and it has a similar or no impact, you know, you can use this submission form or something.
yeah, and if you, even for us, it would helpful, have a list of the waivers that you would want to have, just to make sure
Yeah.
it's covering the bases, that would be a good start for
And
us to
actually, they
look
could
at.
indicate on the form, you know, no change or less impact. Also, you know, that would be
Yeah,
helpful to justify that.
yeah,
Excellent.
so if you're willing to do that, that would be great, perfect.
Do I
Okay,
gather that Max has agreed to do that?
he has,
Thank you,
Wonderful.
Max.
thank you.
Max has all the chores for, after this
Yeah.
meeting.
And he was even here, usually it's the person who's not here that gets all the action items. Okay,
Move adjourn.
So
Whoa,
we're not concentrating on
Ted's
anything
done.
next month?
Ted jumped right past comments from planning board members. So before I ask for a second, although we're theoretically not supposed to, but it hasn't been seconded yet, so I don't have a motion, because there is no comment after a motion for adjournment.
So, excuse me, but let me back up
No problem.
one second. These 3 items, we're not going to concentrate on one over another for the next meeting, or we're waiting for the comprehensive flow to happen?
Well,
These 3 items, it seemed to me we just kind of talked about.
my understanding is that on the climate adaptation, that Bill said we're waiting for, that's going to wait for the comprehensive plan.
Okay.
On the shoreland ordinances, I would like to discuss that next time, because everybody wasn't ready to discuss that further.
Okay.
And I think we had, again, 3 items, which is, I think, any data or information that would cause us to think about changing the numbers for the setback. The addition, the best practices list that Bill is going to get, we're going to get the reference to the state, so we can add the reference to for best practices. And I think for all of us on the table is thinking about what, again, the education issue and on the farm business, animal, shoreland, things that we might want to do for educational issues, I think we would be good to discuss next time. So,
Okay.
and then on the intro, then it's Max's action item for whenever he's ready to talk about the simplified version and the intro. I think we gave him carte blanche to start handing one out, so.
Okay.
You were
Nice.
gonna say something?
Yeah, just for that simplified thing, it's gonna go to the EDC hopefully by that point, so any new updates will be done.
Okay.
And I'll point out that you said you would have your application in months from now, correct, Sarah? So,
Okay,
there's no application that I'm aware of at this point.
okay.
Okay, can I ask a quick question then? I noticed that we were getting a restaurant that moved over here from Wiscasset, so.
Yeah, Golden Walk.
Yes. Are we getting any more from Wiscasset? I mean, no schadenfreude. We're not reveling in anyone else's misery. But any other new exciting news?
What restaurant is this?
The Golden Walk, the Chinese restaurant that apparently was in Waldoboro first,
Yeah.
then went to Wiscasset and was along the street, and is now back in that same spot, just the half the building that wasn't converted.
Oh.
So, what's interesting about that is, well, I actually don't know if you want me to start going on now, since Ted was almost about to get out the door.
It's not 8 o'clock
But
is usually our
I'll
go to
quickly
sleep
just say
time,
this,
so.
for the Golden Walk, the day after the voters said, or whatever the agreement was, that we're gonna get rid of the on-street parking, that's when the owner came to us and said, we wanna move back into the old spot. So they literally have been going at it for months just to get back there, and that was when Wiscasset voted to get rid of their parking. As for anyone else coming from Wiscasset, I guess we need to wait until the parking is actually put in place and someone says, yeah, no, I can't do this anymore. And in which case, that's when I guess.
Reds will move.
Oh, wow.
No,
And
Reds will,
happy day it will be.
no, Reds will be there.
Yeah.
Reds will be there after Wisconsin.
So Walk is moving back to across from Rudy's?
Yep.
Okay.
They actually should be open, I think, at the end of the month.
How about Deb's Diner? Is anyone making any noises about moving over there?
No, I think she's still open, limited hours, because she works as, you mean across the
Right near the
perimeter?
bridge?
No,
Oh, what,
she's talking near the
Oh,
banks.
Deb's Diner. No. I thought you meant the primitive shop.
You just got a bunch of people's hopes up. Deb's Diner's open.
Actually, that lady who worked there opened a place in Jefferson.
Oh.
Oh,
Who was,
Yes, that
Yeah.
is the
yeah,
Lakeside
right
Diner.
behind the school, that right there, yeah.
Okay.
She's been open for a couple months there, so.
okay. So any other comments from
Nope.
any members?
I second
I have,
Ted's motion.
okay, motion's been made and second to adjourn. There being no discussion, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks
That
so
was-
much.
That was
Dislocated my arm.
Just look at me.